just moved into my new home. It wasn't a dream house by any means, but it was cheap, cozy, and had potential. I had just gone through a difficult breakup, and I needed a fresh start. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where the only sounds are the occasional rustling of trees in the wind and the hum of distant traffic. The house itself was old, maybe a century or more, with the kind of creaky floors and uneven door frames that seemed to sigh in the dead of night. But as soon as I moved in, I felt off. It wasn't something I could put my finger on. No one wants to believe in things like ghosts or curses, right? Yet, I felt like something was watching me, something that wasn't supposed to be there. At first, I thought it was just my anxiety kicking in. The first few nights were fine, but on the third night, I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate. Not from the neighbors. No, these were right inside my house. I checked every room, but the sound stopped as soon as I opened the door. A freaky coincidence? Sure, I told myself, but after a few nights of this, it wasn't just the footsteps anymore. The lights started flickering at random intervals. The temperature in the house would drop inexplicably, especially in the hallway near the stairs. I'd find my breath visible in the air, like I was standing in front of an open freezer. I would convince myself it was nothing, maybe the old wiring or a draft in the walls. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One evening, after hearing the faint footsteps again, closer this time, I decided to investigate. I went downstairs, where the sound seemed to originate. It was then that I saw it, a small, almost imperceptible door under the stairs. I had never noticed it before. It was so small, almost as if it didn't belong. The wood was old and warped, its edges cracked. It was the kind of door you only notice in old houses, the kind that leads to nowhere. Curiosity overtook me. I reached for the handle, and it creaked open easily. What I found inside, I could never have imagined. The crawl space was narrow and filled with the scent of dust and mildew. At the very end of the space was a single door, much like the one I had just opened. My heart began to race. This was it. Something was here. Something I was never supposed to find. Inside the tiny room beyond the door was a wooden chair, facing a bare wall. On the wall, pinned in an old rusted frame, was a photograph of a family, a husband and wife, 2 young children. Their faces were blank, as if the photographer had caught them mid-expression. But there was something strange about it, something unsettling. I stared at the photo for a while, trying to figure it out. Then it hit me. One of the children looked like me, exactly like me. That's when it began. My life began to spiral into a nightmare. I realized that this was no coincidence. And that photograph, it was more than a mere memento. It was a piece of something far darker. But I wasn't ready to know what was coming. Not yet. The next few days were a blur of confusion and dread. I couldn't get the photograph out of my mind. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was losing touch with reality. I began to hear whispers when no one was around. Not the kind you can rationalize as wind or house settling, but distinct, purposeful whispers. One night, I woke up to see a shadow move across the room. Then, I began to find things missing. Small items like keys, a mug, and even the shoes I'd just left by the door. They'd reappear in odd places, like the kitchen counter or even under the floorboards. But the worst part? The faces in the photograph started changing. At first, it was subtle. A flicker of movement in their eyes, a shift in their posture. But soon, the changes were more pronounced, especially the child who looked like me. Her face started to distort. becoming less like a child and more like an adult, a face that seemed to watch me from the frame. I decided to find out more about the house's previous occupants. I went to the local library and dug through public records. That's when I found the name of the family in the photograph. The Carsons. They had lived in the house decades ago, but they were never heard from again. The files mentioned a tragic fire in the house, one that claimed the lives of both parents. The children, however, were never found. There was nothing more in the records. I thought it was a strange coincidence, until I found a second photograph. It was in a box in the attic, hidden beneath old newspapers and old furniture. It was the same family again, but this time, it was clear the children were still alive, standing in the same spot in front of the same wall. That's when I started seeing them, not just in photographs, but out of the corner of my eye. Shadows darting across the walls, figures standing just behind me when I looked into mirrors. I would wake up to the feeling of hands on my shoulders, cold and clammy. But when I turned, no one was there. I began to feel like I was being drawn into something I couldn't escape. The room under the stairs began to feel like a trap, like I was being lured toward it. One night, I decided to confront whatever was in that room. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way down to the hidden door again. But when I opened it, the room wasn't empty. The chair was facing the wall as usual, but now there was something on the chair, a small old notebook, stained and worn. I picked it up. The first page was blank, but the second, it was covered in writing, and the words were mine. I couldn't believe it. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, but the words didn't make sense. The first entry read, "They're coming. They'll never leave me. I am one of them now." The more I read, the more terrified I became. The entries grew more frantic. They spoke of a cycle, something that began with the photograph and the children. And then, the last entry. "I am the child in the photo. I am both the child and the watcher. I have always been here." It was like the notebook had been written by someone, me, from a different time, or even a different version of myself. I realized the truth. The family had never left. They were trapped in the house, looping through time, and I had unknowingly become part of their curse. The house felt like it was closing in on me. The whispers grew louder, the shadows more distinct. Every time I closed my eyes, I would see the faces of the Carsons, twisted, distorted, always watching. And then, one night, I was no longer alone. The child in the photograph stood at the foot of my bed, her face grotesque, her eyes wide open, staring straight through me. She whispered my name. "It's your turn now." In that moment, I understood. I was never supposed to leave. I was part of the cycle, the next victim, the next shadow in the photo. And now, the house had me. The police found the house empty a few weeks later. Nothing strange was reported. The house was sold again, ready for another tenant. The next person who steps into that home will, unknowingly, walk the same path I did, into the hidden room, into the trap, into the photograph, and the cycle will continue.